To go.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to our public meeting to council, staff, and the general public. So welcome to our public meeting of March the 15th. At this time, I'll hand it over to Mrs. Haley. So go ahead, Mrs. Haley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So tonight we have a public meeting for a zoning amendment that is for a proposed private school. I'm just going to start off with some rules of engagement. So welcome to everyone who's attending the meeting this evening. For members of the public that are participating by Zoom or by phone, you will be permitted to speak to the respective application following my presentation. Prior to speaking, please state your name and address for the record. To make a comment, please use the raise hand function and the chair will call on you. If you have registered to participate in the meeting by phone, for the application, you'll be asked if you would like to comment on the application after the presentation. So now I'm going to read required wording under the Ontario Planning Act. This is a hearing under Section 34 of the Ontario Planning Act. Any person may attend this hearing and/or make written or verbal representation, either in support of or in opposition to the proposed zoning amendment. If a person or public body does not make oral or written submissions at this hearing before the zoning amendment is decided upon, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the council to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, also known as LPAT. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at this hearing or make written submissions to the Township of South Glengarry before the zoning amendment is decided upon, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the LPAT unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. So I'm going to start off the presentation this evening introducing the purpose of the amendment, and I'll speak minimally to the official plan policies and other land use planning policies, as the applicant has retained a planning consultant. So I'll turn the presentation over to the consultant as soon as I'm finished. So this property is located at part of Lot 33, Concession 1, north of the Raisin River, in the geographic township of Charlottenburg, which is now in South Glengarry, also known as 18803 County Road 18. This is a key map of the parcel of property. So this parcel is highlighted in light blue. It is located between County Road 18 to the south and Beaver Brook Road to the north. This orange outlined area in this location is the village boundary of Martintown, sorry. So it's located just east of the village. The subject property is approximately 53 acres in area and is currently developed, containing a single detached dwelling and a small storage shed at the south end of the property off of County Road 18. The subject property is privately serviced with a septic system and a well. The purpose of this amendment is to rezone the southern portion of the subject property from rural to rural exception 15 to permit the development of a private school that will be operated as an accessory use, either within the existing single detached dwelling or within a detached structure. This map outlines the area that would be subject to the zoning amendment. So if this is approved, this area would be highlighted as rural exception 15, and the remainder of the area would remain in the rural zone. So the township received a zoning amendment application on February 12, 2021, and the complete submission contained the zoning amendment application as well as the planning rationale. The planning rationale is a report that's prepared by a planner that demonstrates that the proposed use conforms to the provincial policy statement in the official plan. And the consultant will get into that in a couple of minutes. So the subject property is designated rural district in the county official plan, and the proposed zoning amendment conforms to the official plan. The United Counties of SD and G have been circulated on this application, as well as all properties within 120 meters. To date, I've not received any comments or questions, and I do anticipate hearing from the United Counties before a report is provided to council. So the zoning amendment application will be subject to a decision of council, and a staff report including a recommendation will be brought to council for a decision in the near future. All public comments must be received by Friday, March 19th, which is this Friday at 4 p.m. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to the consultant, John Meek. John is going to take over and explain all the details about this proposed private school. So thank you.
You can go ahead, Mr. Meek. I'm not sure if you are speaking, but if you are, you might be on mute.
Oops. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry about that little hiccup.
That's okay.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, member of councils, Ms. Haley. Thank you for the introduction. I'll continue on with the presentation now on the proposed private school. I'm the planner representing Sarah McCullough and Edwin Ferguson, the property owners. And I'll just give you an overview tonight of the proposed use, the planning policy and regulatory framework, and the planning rationale for this proposed use.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I'm having a hard time hearing the gentleman. Could he maybe speak up?
Or if you can get closer to the mic or turn your microphone up, Mr. Meek.
Okay, I've got headphones on. Can you hear me now, Mr. Warden?
It's a little bit better.
Okay. I'll try to speak directly into this mic. If you could go to the next slide, please, Ms. Haley.
Oops,
There we go.
sorry about that.
That's okay. So here's a zoomed in map of the proposed area for the zoning amendment. It's approximately 2 hectares in size out of the entire property of 53 acres. The proposed use is for a small private school on a large rural property. Sarah McCullough is a qualified teacher with extensive background and experience in outdoor and experiential education. She's passionate about learning in and through nature. And the proposed location for this private school really exemplifies the approach for this school being nature-based education in a rural area. So the property is kind of ideally suited for the vision that Ms. McCullough has for the private school. At this point, the proposal is for a detached building to be constructed 24 by 36. According to all of the zoning bylaw requirements, we'll have 2 washrooms, a new septic system, and we'll be able to accommodate up to 15 to 30 students. But at this point, Ms. McCullough is planning for a maximum of about 20 students. It will operate like a normal school with arrival and departure during normal school hours of 8:30 and 3:30. And actually, if you could just go back for a second, adjacent land use is mostly rural and mixed agriculture, but immediately to the west, there is a 40-foot road allowance, and then there is a licensed pit owned by Cornwall Gravel. Before finalizing the application, we consulted with Ms. Haley at the township as well as Mr. Travis Mitchell at Cornwall Gravel, just to make sure there were no concerns. And Cornwall Gravel has expressed that they do not have any concerns with the proposal as long as it does not interfere with the lawful use of the pit. Next slide, please. In reviewing the planning legislation, the provincial policy statement has 2 sections relevant to this application. As you are well aware, the provincial policy speaks to the importance of rural areas and rural lands, and specifically states that healthy, integrated, viable rural areas should be supported by, among other things, building upon rural character and promoting diversification of the economic base. It also states that development that is compatible with the rural landscape and can be sustained by rural service levels should be promoted. The private school will serve a small niche market within the township, thereby diversifying the local rural economy. It's a small scale school focused on the rural character and the environment of the property. The other provincial policy section is with respects to land use compatibility. As I mentioned, there is a licensed pit adjacent to the property to the west. It's considered a major facility, and residences as well as educational institutions are considered sensitive land uses. So where they can't, they shouldn't be located adjacent to each other, but where you can't avoid that, you should minimize and mitigate potential adverse effects. So that's the case here. And provincial policy says we need to consider four main things in this situation. The first one is if there is an identified need for the proposed use. The second is alternative locations for the proposed use have been evaluated and there are no reasonable alternative locations. The third is that adverse effects to the proposed sensitive land use are minimized and mitigated. And the fourth is that potential impacts to industrial manufacturing or other uses are minimized and mitigated. There is a need for the proposed use. Many families have reached out to Ms. McCullough. She has developed this private school concept and they have expressed an interest in a small school with an environmental focus. The proposed location, as I mentioned, is ideal for the focus of the private school rather than in the settlement area of Martintown, where there wouldn't be the open space and the trails and the environment for this a curriculum kind of focused on outdoor education. And in terms of mitigating factors, the location, proposed location of the school is further away from the licensed pit than the existing residence. And as I mentioned, Cornwall Gravel has no concerns as long as the lawful use of the pit is not impacted. Next slide, please. With respects to the United Counties of SDNG official plan, there are a few sections relevant to this application. The first one speaks to public service facilities in the rural area, table 3.5.1 in the plan. So the plan permits public service facilities like a private school, except where there's a zoning bylaw amendment required. The following matters must be considered. So that's the case here. We need to consider that the proposed use would not be better located in a settlement area. Volume and pattern of traffic flow, privacy of adjacent landowners and potential impacts from lighting, noise, odor, dust, or traffic, impact on neighboring agricultural uses, and that the development is in keeping with the surrounding rural character and landscape. The proposed site has a lot of open space, forested land with trails. Arrival and departure, as I mentioned, will be during normal school hours. Adequate parking and turnaround area will be provided for safe access and egress. No additional lighting or signage is required. And we don't feel privacy will be impacted just from the scale of the use, but also there will be a fenced-in schoolyard put in place. Next slide, please. The plan goes on to say that local municipalities may locate some public service facilities to better serve the rural area or smaller settlements where an urban location is less suitable. And that's the case here in terms of the vision for this private school. It is considered a private service facility, which will be operated by an individual. And it provides a viable alternative to public education options for families who are looking at smaller school size, smaller class size, with focus on the outdoors and the environment. Next one, please. With respects to extractive resource lands, the proposed land use is within the 300-meter influence area of the licensed pit. So where a sensitive land use is proposed within this area, the proponent shall be responsible for mitigation measures, and development will not be permitted on or adjacent to the extractive resource lands if it would preclude or hinder access to the resource, restrict the expansion or continued use of the resource, or be incompatible for reasons of public health and safety. Currently, the pit is not active. Mr. Mitchell didn't say when it might become active, but Ms. McCullough and Mr. Ferguson purchased the property in 2016 with full knowledge of the licensed pit and that it could become active at some point. There's currently 9 residences, existing residences within the 300-meter influence area of the licensed pit. And the proposed detached building, which would house the private school, will be actually further away from the pit than the existing residence. Other mitigation measures I mentioned already include fencing around the perimeter of the schoolyard. Okay, next slide, please. With respects to the zoning bylaw of the township, the subject lands are currently zoned rural, and section 10.1 does not permit a private school. So the application therefore is to permit the private school in an attached or detached building as an exception to the rural zone. Next slide, please. This is the final slide and presents a summary of the planning rationale. The proposed use does conform with the applicable policies of the PBS 2020 and the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry official plan approved in February 2018. The proposed development of the private school responds to a need for alternative education options and is compatible with the rural character of the area. Mitigation measures have been incorporated into the proposal to minimize potential adverse impacts associated with the adjacent licensed pit, and establishing an exception in the rural zone rather than an amendment to an institutional zone will ensure that other institutional uses will not be permitted on the subject land. So it provides for controlled development. And finally, the proposed area of the subject lands provides sufficient space to meet the necessary provisions of the zoning bylaw. And that is all I have in my presentation for tonight, Mr. Mayor. Gladly take questions.
Okay, thanks very much for your presentation. I will open it up to council. I'll ask Joanne to take down the, thank you. Councillor Lang, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for the presentation, and it's nice to see people doing new things in our community. My question is, there was a lot of comments and a lot of thought put into the distance from the quarry. Is there any concern with the fact that there's a pipeline going through the middle of that yard? If I'm not mistaken, on the diagonal line where there's no trees is an actual pipeline going through there. Is that a problem, or is it going to be worked around?
Yes, pardon me, Councillor Lang, I forgot to mention that when the map was up there. As you correctly point out, there is a pipeline easement going diagonal through the property. The proposed location for the school is at the east end, which provides sufficient space for the location of the septic system as well as the building. As I understand, the pipeline agreement allows for agricultural uses to travel over the pipeline itself, but there are restrictions on other non-agricultural vehicles, and we're looking into that now with respects to access to the county road.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other comments or questions from members of council? Councillor McDonnell.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I had the same concern as Councillor Lang as far as that is. I'm not sure which pipeline that is. I'm trying to remember if that was one that they were looking at twinning, but it may not. Another question I had for Ms. Haley was, we see the existing location of the quarry where it is now. What's the potential for any of the expansion there? It's kind of hard to see the property line when I'm looking at it here on Google Maps in general. There's like a little, maybe it's a dwelling, I think, at the road in between the property and the quarry. Is that on Cornell Gravel or is property? The small single dwelling, I guess, or shed, or it's hard to tell from Google.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the dwelling is located on a separated parcel, and so it's surrounded by the quarry lands. or the pitlands. And that property is entirely zoned to accommodate a licensed pit. So if Cornwall Gravel, when they choose to activate that site, they already have all the approvals in place to do so. And that's why it was important for the consultant and the property owner to work with Cornwall Gravel in advance, because all quarry companies, I should say pit and quarry companies or aggregate companies, really do try to protect what they have. It's very costly to get those licenses. They make sure they have all the planning processes in place. So I feel that the applicant and the consultant have done a great job in looking at the proximity of it. As they mentioned, there's 9 homes that are closer, and they have entered into an agreement with Cornwall Gravel, so they've mitigated those concerns.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other comments or questions from members of council? Not seeing none. I'll ask if there's any questions or comments from any of the public.
I think I'm still the host, Mr. Mayor, and I don't see anybody's hand up. I have 3 attendees.
Okay, thank you. I do see the 3, but I didn't see any hands up on those either. So thanks for that, Deputy Mayor Warden. Mr. Meek, any final comments that you wanted to make?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Haley, anything further?
No, that's it. Thank you for attending, and I'll have a staff report before council, possibly at the next meeting or the meeting thereafter. So thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll ask somebody to adjourn the meeting for this evening. Moved by Councillor McDonnell, second by Lyle Warden. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Thanks very much, everyone, for attending our public meeting, and we'll see council at 7 p.m. for our regular council meeting.
Thank you.